Now we're going to hear from Terry Ahern, who's the CEO of the Scottish Environment Protection Agency.
Thank you, Jennifer. So I want to pick up on a couple of comments that have been made in the first part of the session. Lord Deben, you just talked about we don't have time. So we have very little time left to solve these problems. Jennifer, in your introduction, you talked about the collaboration is the key. So what does a regulator have to offer in this field? And I do actually want to use my 10 minutes to make an offer. So from the Scottish Environment Protection Agency, or SEPA, I have an offer to your sector, your profession, your field of endeavour. And it's based on turning around what a regulator is for. So when ministers or governments or parliaments create a regulator, they are creating a set of public officials who can interfere in people's lives. That's not something that politicians do very readily. They do it when there's a good reason and a need. And essentially the need is bad stuff's happening and you need someone to do something about it. So if you look back at the history of health and safety, it's a very blunt way to say it, but too many workers were being injured or killed, so you needed a health and safety regulator. The history of environment agencies or EPAs is toxic pollution in rivers, terrible air quality, waste out of control, so you set up a regulator. If you take the point about we don't have much time left, so if we get to the end of this decade and we haven't made serious inroads into decarbonising, dematerialising our economies and societies, then time will be up. And quite seriously for our species, it'll be up. So a regulator needs no longer just to stop bad stuff. We need to do that. Here in Scotland, many of you will be aware we have issues such as the unnecessary flaring that happens at the ExxonMobil site at Mossmoran. That's an example of the traditional stuff as places like SEPA were set up for, and we put a huge effort into that. We have to get them to stop doing that traditional sort of pollution impact. But that's not enough anymore. What we have to do is help businesses like that, and it sounds a bit strange in terms of business like that, decarbonise, dematerialise. We have to make the energy transition. And that means as a regulator, we have to shift from being satisfied with just achieving compliance outcomes. So in our One Planet Prosperity strategy, we are very clear we will get everyone to compliance. But if we get everyone to compliance, which is what a regulator tends to judge itself on, that will be nowhere near enough, because that won't get us anywhere near decarbonising and dematerialising, and not quickly enough. So I wrote a statement last night for something we're working on, and it went along the lines, something like this, that the goal of a set of regulators getting together on a project in Scotland, I can't remember the exact words, but it was something such as, at its worst, regulation doesn't even solve compliance problems. Like when regulation's operating badly, it doesn't solve compliance problems, and it certainly doesn't help with innovation and transformation. It usually gets in the way. At its very best, and this is what we need from regulators in this decade, we have to quickly solve compliance problems so compliance becomes yesterday's issues. For goodness sake, if we've got a decade to really make these big inroads, then we can't be spending it struggling to get people to compliance. We have to get people to compliance quickly. That becomes yesterday's issue. And what we focus on is not just not getting in the way of innovation, the sort of innovation that you're talking about at this conference. We become a very active driver, supporter, partner of it. So my offer is from SEPA that we will make that transition, and we are making it. And I just want to give a few examples. We have what we tend to regulate is the sites. So if you take the whisky industry, it's our top performing industry in terms of compliance. Last ratings were 94%. We'll get them to that 100%. They're very determined about it. They've set a beyond compliance strategy for themselves. Their trade association, the Scotch Whisky Association, launched it a couple of weeks ago. It sets ambitious targets for reducing carbon, reducing waste, reducing water beyond what the law requires, and not just at its sites that we regulate, but through its supply chains. That sort of ambition is what SEPA is here to support. And if I give you a hypothetical example, it's not hypothetical, but it's commercial in confidence, so I can't reveal who it is. But what we tend to get is businesses coming to us now and saying, look, we think our waste stream could become the feedstock for an industry as part of the food and sector field in Scotland. We can just sit back and say, well, that would be good. But what we actually do is when we regulate sites in 34 sectors, we are effectively regulating supply chains and value chains to unlock a lot of the innovation, and including the sort of things you're talking about at this conference. One thing that has to happen is you have to be able to share risk and return through supply chains and value chains, because sometimes the costs of an innovation in a supply chain will fall largely to one set of businesses, and sometimes the revenue will fall to another set. Sometimes the risks are very split along the supply chain. We have the ability to work on that. So for example, barley growers, whiskey distillers up in the north of Scotland, certainly where the distillers are, suffer from droughts. As an Australian, I find it a bit strange to understand when I first came here that Scotland does have droughts, but we do. And that water shortage is a threat to the environment, but it's also a threat to the economics of those two sectors. While they're in the same supply chain, we regulate them both. In our new way of regulating, how do we help them work together to reduce water use in ways that means they can produce the quality of product, one as an input to the other, and then the whiskey industry as the product they then sell into the consumer market? How do we partner with them and help them in that supply chain arrangement unlock the sort of innovation that will tackle these really significant issues? The other example, and I just want to finish on this one, is our placemaking set of initiatives. So we have 6 placemaking trials. Placemaking is becoming a bit of a buzzword. Things tend to become a buzzwords because they're meaningless cliches or because they actually mean something worthwhile, and I think placemaking does. And so in the leaving catchment, we have 14 partners signed up to one of our voluntary sustainable growth agreements. Everyone from private businesses like Diageo through to the local council, Fife Council, Keep Scotland Beautiful, the Coal Authority. And what we have there, we started with our job was looking after water quality. What we really have is 15 partners working with the community on how do we decarbonise, dematerialise this part of Scotland. And when we launched that Sustainable Growth Agreement, I said on STV News that this was one of the heartlands of the original high carbon industrial revolution, which created so much of our prosperity. We didn't understand what the impact of that carbon would be back then. Wouldn't it be sensational if this could be one of the heartlands of the next low carbon industrial revolution? And that's the sort of thing we're working on with a whole group of partners over there. Now, when you have ideas from your sector, the offer is there from SEPA. Don't come and talk to us about, look, here's SEPA's standards that the standards that we administer on behalf of the Parliament. Here's SEPA's processes. Forget our processes, forget the law. Don't worry about that. We'll come back to the law if we need to. But come and say, we've got an idea. We've got an idea how to decarbonise. We've got an idea about how to dematerialise. And talk to us about, is there a role we can play with our various work in supply chains, with our various placemaking initiatives? Because I'm making an offer to you and you need to come and say, SEPA, you've made this offer. Well, we've got something that we want to partner with you on. The worst we can say is we don't think we can help, or it's not for us at this time. But the offer's there, and we really need, I think, to take up what Jennifer said about collaboration needs to be the key, and collaboration in a new way for organisations such as mine. So I hope that's a useful contribution to the conference, and I look forward to the rest of the session.